Well, welcome to the first lecture in 2005. It's good to see so many of you that risked the weather to come out, and we certainly appreciate that. But I think we have a speaker that's well worth your effort, and I'm certain that you'll agree with me when he's done. Our program for next month is Tom Mert. Tom has lived in Upper Moreland Township for quite a few years, was a commissioner, and is just back from serving a year in active duty, was a Pennsylvania National Guard in Pennsylvania, in Iraq. Now, some of you might say, gee, I thought this was World War II. Don and I thought it might be well for us to get tuned into reality, right? Not that World War II isn't reality to many of us, but I think Tom Mert has an interesting story to tell us. I think he has some information that we all should know about, and he's calling it Behind the News in Iraq Today. So come to see and hear Tom Mert. Now, we need a speaker for March the 15th. Geez, I thought 8 or 9 of you would just, right, volunteers, my goodness. I guess we'll have to scrape the barrel then, right, Don, again? Well, listen, we can't continue these lectures until we have lecturers, right? It's sort of fundamental. So if you feel that you might want to try it, give us a call and we'll help you if you need help putting together a program, but we do need your help to continue the program going. Right now we're going to start with a pledge to the flag by Lillian Abelli. Lillian?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Lillian's putting that on. That's Mia's. Mia and Lillian. All right, in the middle of the page of the outline, you'll see that there's going to be a children's program, ages 7 and up. And that's going to be put on by Mia Greco and Lillian. And that's Thursday, March the 10th, 6:30 to 8 p.m.
February.
Excuse me?
February is Lillian.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So February the 17th from 7 to 8, and then Mia Greco will be March the 10th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. Looks as though it's going to be an interesting program. When we booked Bill Moses as our speaker today, I thought it would be well, instead of having a formal invocation, decided to read a poem by one of the poets that was killed in World War II in the Philippines 6 or 8 months, 2 years after Pearl Harbor. So I thought we'd use his poem to focus on Bill's talk. This poem is by Lieutenant Lee. He was a prisoner at the Cabanatuan concentration camp in the Philippines. Listen to what he tells us. Yes, we'll have our small white crosses by and by, our cool green lawns, our well-spaced, well-cared trees, our antique cannons, muzzles to the sky, our statues and our flowers in our wreaths. We'll have our bold-faced bronze and copper plaques to tell in stirring words what we saved and who we were, with names and dates, our stacks of silent rifles spaced between the graves. We'll have our dedications by and by, with ardors and bands to set us free, and shining, well-fed troops. Above will fly the planes with stars we never lived to see. We'll have our country's praises, and here below they'll make a shrine of this small bit of hell for wide-eyed tourists. And so few will know, and those who know will be the last to tell the wordless suffering of our lives as slaves, our squalid deaths beneath this dripping sky, the stinking tangle of our common graves. Yes, we'll have our small white crosses by and by. And then as a follow-up, Hampton Sides, who wrote the excellent book called Ghost Soldiers, about the raid on Cabanatuan prison camp. This is his epilogue. Today, the site of the Cabanatuan camp is a modest park covered by tropical fruit trees. A memorial wall of white marble lists the names of 2,656 Americans who perished there. Note, no white crosses or brass plaques in that cemetery. It gives you an idea of the utter horror that those men were subjected to. Now, our speaker today is Bill Moses. He was at Pearl Harbor. He's going to tell us about his experiences roughly from 1940 to 1946. And we'll have an opportunity after Bill has talked to us to raise questions. And we'll be happy to follow the same program. That is, I'll have the microphone. I'll recognize you as the speaker, give you the mic, and then Bill will answer your questions. Without further ado, Bill Moses.
Can you all hear me? This thing working?
I don't know if you turned it on.
That one too.
Yeah, right.
Okay, can you all hear me? Fine, fine, fine. I was no hero. I just saw a lot of things. And I'm sure that you've heard many, many more wonderful stories in this group. I was very interested in hearing about it, and so here I am. I'd like to go back a little bit just before the war. A lot of you I know remember a lot of this, but I was born and raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, not too far away from here. Although some Philadelphians have told me that's upstate. I don't think it is. It's just next door. And I was working at the Bethlehem Steel Company in one of their specialty plants, making shells, among other things, for the Navy and also for the French, 75 millimeter shells for the French. This is 1940. I guess we got stuck with a lot of 75 millimeter shells then because the French were no more. There was a lot of feeling against the war, a lot of feeling against the British, a lot of feeling in favor of Germany. And some of the people that I knew had come back from Germany in 35, 36, 37, telling how wonderful Hitler was. So, so President Roosevelt, if many of you remember, had a very hard time interesting the United States in armaments, in building up the fleet, building up the army. It just wasn't being done, but he finally got through the draft law. Some of you probably remember that. And I wanted to get in the Navy. I always wanted to be in the Navy, and I liked the ocean. So there was a commander living up the street from me, and I went to see him, and he told me how to get in a V7 program, where you had to have at least 2 years of college, and they'd send you on a a month's voyage on one of the battleships, and then if you were selected, you'd go away to midshipman school. I pulled to New York, and it's the huge new battleship New York, and it's the only ship I ever got seasick on, and I really did. After a month on that, I was sent to Chicago for training. Now, if you believe it, the idea was that you'd go in for a year, and then that'd be it. Before I left for Chicago, I became engaged, and I was hoping that I thought that I might get to Pearl, get out to the Hawaiian Islands, because I was going to ask for that duty, and she would come out and we'd get married. After 3 months of intensive training in Chicago, I got my assignment. And one of the shipmates I had in school also had an assignment, the same type of a ship, a seagoing tug from the First World War. Mine was AT-28, an old tub that had only one screw, very hard to maneuver, but it was really a salvage tug. It had a lot of diving equipment on it. It had everything on it but guns. They were locked up in the locker. When we graduated from school, we were given the opportunity to go on inactive duty, because actually there were not quite enough ships to put a lot of us on, surprising as it may seem. We were pretty far down the list in armaments and everything else. Well, this friend of mine and I drove across the country, reported in San Diego, and his tug was right in front of where we reported. He got on that tug and went right back through the canal to Casco Bay, Maine, and never left Casco for the duration of the war. So you can't tell what you're going to get. I hung around in California having a high old time for about a month before they sent us over to Pearl. And you know, in those days they didn't fly planes over there, you had to go by ship. So we had a very nice trip on one of the Matson liners, and I reported in. And I'll never forget going across aboard this tug. I dressed up. Now, this is a working tug with old-time sailors. It was prime duty for them because although it was sea duty, they didn't have to stay over, you know, we didn't go to sea too much overnight. And I'm walking aboard the tug in my whites, all dolled up, and this old chief boilermaker looks at me like this, says, "Oh, you're the new ensign," you know. So they made me feel a little green for a while, but after a while, I got to learn a great deal. What we did was tow targets, move pineapple barges, move around in the yard, moving ships, etc. And one of the big jobs we had was pushing in the battleships when they came into port, because they couldn't maneuver alongside in Pearl Harbor without tug assistance. I remember the day before Pearl Harbor, on December the 6th. It was a beautiful day in Honolulu, and there was a big football game. We all went to it. We had helped push all those battleships into place. And the way they had nested them, I had never seen before. If any of you have ever been to Pearl, if any of you have ever been to Hawaiian Islands, seen the Arizona Memorial there, all along there were all those battleships. And the whole fleet was in. They'd been out on maneuvers. They knew the Japanese were working in the area. We had seen, friends of mine had seen Japanese submarines, got them on sonar because they were scouting and looking around. Nothing was done. I was the only one aboard the tug, and we were anchored right opposite where the battleship row was. So we had a perfect view of it, near where the Marine Railway was, and also the big dry dock in which Pennsylvania was in there being overhauled. I was sound asleep in my bunk, and I heard one of my signalmen, who was going to make colors, yell, "They're not blasting, it's the Japs." So I jumped right out, and the first thing I saw was 2 torpedo planes come flying out of submarine channel, and lobbing their torpedoes at the battleships. And I never saw anything so slow in my life. In fact, I held my breath because I thought the torpedo planes would fall right into the superstructure of the battleships. And we watched all this going on. Now, none of the other officers were aboard, so I ran down and called the captain, called the executive officer, and called the engineering officer who were living in town, and came back on up topside, and I saw the Arizona taking that bomb right down its stack. I was standing right on the deck, and I watched that thing come right down. The horrible thing about it was when these Japanese flyers came in, they turned their machine guns on sailors that were going on liberty in their longboats, going into shore, and killing a lot of them unnecessarily. Well, we got underway very rapidly, putting the ship underway, and went all around to see what we could do. We tried to put the fire out on the California, I think it was burning very badly, but there were a lot of wounded men on the deck, so we didn't do that. We finally ended up on the other side of the island beside the cruiser Raleigh. Now, it had taken some bombs right down their decks, and the funniest thing happened. Raleigh just settled right down in the water, and of course, flooded. The captain of the Raleigh called us over. We tied up alongside of it, and from 2 to 3 days, we stayed there, trying to. Well, our bosun mate and a couple of our sailors went down and put soft patches on the hold and started pumping out the Raleigh and really saving it. That night, about a detachment of Marine flyers came up from the Big Island from Hawaii, and we were told they were there, but you know, everybody was so upset, so gun happy that we let fly on those, and you hear this all the time, killing your own people. All those Marine pilots were hit. After all, well, we couldn't tell anybody that we were alive, and it was a mess. The ships were burning. The Arizona was burning. I saw steel burn. I'd been in a steel factory, but I'd never seen steel burn like these did. Smoke all over the place, oil, debris, everything. So as time went on, the captain, about 4 days later, after we got back to our dockside, the captain came into me and said, Navy Yard wants us to put down what we saw. And he had 3 charts of Pearl Harbor, classified charts of Pearl Harbor. Well, I was the only one on the ship to begin with. I'd seen a lot of the Japanese planes shot down. And we, of course, were pretty well over the harbor. And so I filled out the chart. He did a little bit. He said, now you can have a copy and I'll keep a copy and we'll send the regular one in. I was so afraid because it was a classified document that I never brought mine home. I wish I had, but I didn't at the time. But the captain got a commendation for the fact that we had a pretty good chart. And I know that some of the things that are in the official documents for the attack, we were able to help them with. I stayed on the tug for about 6 months, and then they had a section base up in Nauwili, Kauai. Now, if any of you people have been in Hawaii, to me, the best island in the Hawaiian Islands is Kauai. It's a beautiful island. And there were a whole lot of sailors without ships. So what happened was the Navy impounded every Japanese sampan, fishing sampan, and put a lot of us sailors on these sampans for submarine patrol. What we had was a one pound gun, 50 caliber machine guns, and a whole rack of depth charges. And we went out on patrol 2 and 3 days a week. 1 ensign or JG and about 6 sailors. very primitive, cooking over a stove, eating hamburgers and hot dogs for 3 days, and doing everything over the side. But those sampans were very, very seaworthy. The Japanese, I have to take my hat off to them. They were very, very good seamen. They had sponsons along the side, really cavities, where they put ice in there and they'd put their fish in there, and they'd stay out to sea for a couple weeks. It would cruise. The cruising radius of one of those sampans was about 2,000 miles. We patrolled during the day and patrolled at night. There wasn't much to do, so what we did was fish a lot, catching a lot of pretty nice fish and taking it in for our cooks to cook it in the section base. Well, I was there for a couple months and was promoted to a seagoing yacht, which had sound gear on it and had a crew of 25, and it was a pretty nice little ship. It rode very roughly because it had a round bottom, but it was very seaworthy. And then my orders came. My orders came to what we used to call a Sea Scout Training Center. It was a school in Miami that was developing us and teaching us for convoy duty, basically for convoy duty. And it was a very extensive class work. They really taught us a lot of stuff. And then after we got through with that, about 6 weeks, we went to sound school in Key West and ran on submarines, practiced on live submarines. Now, in the meantime, when I came back to the States to go to school, I got 10 days leave, 10 days delay in reporting. And then I married my wife in 10 days, and she was able to come to Miami with me, so I was pretty fortunate. We never had a honeymoon, but we did spend a little time down there, and she went to Key West. After I was finished in Key West, I came back to good old Philadelphia, and I went to damage control school and firefighting school. The firefighters were Boston firemen, ex-Boston firemen, and boy, they really put us through our paces. I ate smoke for 2 weeks, and it was really, really a very good training. My assignment on the ship that I was to go to, which was being constructed in Orange, Texas, was as first lieutenant. Now, some of you Navy guys know what a first lieutenant is, but actually it was nothing but the ship's janitor. He had the deck crew, made sure that the ship was clean, and also was in control of damage control, telling everybody what would happen if a shell was hit here, something was hit there, etc. What happened was the captain and the engineering officer and the first lieutenant, that was me, went to Orange, Texas, while the ship was being constructed, and we worked very hard. Another guy and I went to welding school to see if we could learn how to weld, because these DEs were made of nothing but very, very thin shells. And I had to write damage control procedures. What you do if it was hit here, what you do if it was there, if there was a fire, anything that happened on the ship. The executive officer and the gunnery officer were off with the rest of the crew with gunnery practice and things of that sort. The ship was built, as I said, in Houston, Texas, the head of the Sabine River. And I was amazed, absolutely amazed, at what we were doing in this country. The way we were putting ships together, the way things were moving, etc. Finally, we commissioned the ship. I have a picture of what a DE looks like if anybody wants to see it later on. I also have a bit of a Navy, a Jap plane, just a little bit, so you'll see how tinny they were. Then we put the thing in commission, but the rest of our division consisted of 6 DEs, were still being built. We were one of the first in our division. So they sent us to the Caribbean. It's a convoy between Trinidad and Guantanamo Bay. We loved Trinidad, we hated Guantanamo Bay, because the minute we got there we had to train, go out on gunnery practice, all that kind of stuff. We made stops at Curacao and Barbados, and we were bringing tankers with Venezuela oil from Trinidad up to Guantanamo Bay and then on up into Texas and on up to here. When our tour of duty was over, and as our division started to build up, we were then put on regular convoy duty in the Atlantic, and our convoys left from Norfolk, Virginia. Every week, they would be sent here every 10 days. They'd be sending convoys of 100 to 110 ships, loaded with everything that you can think of. We saw engines on the superstructures of the ship, railroads, etc. Much of this stuff was going into the Mediterranean and helping to build that overland railway from Azerbaijan up into Russia. Now the United States was really starting to come into its own, getting help to Russia to ease that front, which they were on with all of the gear that they had. We had many refrigeration ships with meat, everything else. One of our trips, we ran into a hurricane, and there's nothing worse than an Atlantic hurricane. I'd sooner be in a typhoon in the Pacific than I would a hurricane in the Atlantic, because the hurricanes covered the whole ocean, from Norfolk all the way to the Mediterranean. And you should have seen those merchant skippers scatter. You never saw them until we got toward Gibraltar. They knew what a hurricane was like, and they got through safely. I guess the sub stayed down that way. In between our trip, we would go back into Boston, which was our home port. And every time we went into Boston, we had to do all kinds of navals, changes, change orders galore. This is where I learned how to get a little what the Chinese call kumshaw. As the first lieutenant, the captain would call me in and say, "Hey, Moses, I want a shelf here, and I want something here, and I want something." They weren't in the navals, so we had to get the leading men in the wardroom for, a little coffee and maybe a little pound of butter or two, and get them to do a little work for the ship. Because after all, we were interested in our ship. We were interested in making our crew comfortable. On the second trip, the gunnery officer left. He was senior to me, but I was picked as the exec. So now I am not the first lieutenant anymore. I'm the exec and the navigator. And that was a very interesting thing. We were the junior ship in our division, and they needed a ship to go up to England to bring back a bunch of little LCIs that had been used in the Atlantic and in England, and were pretty well worn out. So we were told to bring these guys back. This was my first and only experience in the North Atlantic in the wintertime. And I'm telling you, it's cold. The ship iced over. We had to get out, with the steam, knock it off. It was a very, very rough trip. Some days we only made about a 24-knot advance, and one day we didn't even go at all. Now, I'm the new navigator, and the weather was so bad, I never got a star sight. And incidentally, in those days you used sextants. These were prehistoric days, before cell phones and all that kind of stuff. We used sextants until toward the end of the war we got Loran. But I didn't get a star sight at all the way back. Most of it was dead reckoning until I got close to the coast and got a sunline. And now the captain was a pretty good navigator. He was the former exec and had moved up. And he kept screaming at me, did I know where I was? Well, we hit the the shoreline, and you know, Norfolk is so, and the Chesapeake down there is so low. The radar that we had that was finally installed was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as it could be. Didn't pick things up too well, nothing like what they have today. A destroyer was coming out of Norfolk, and he asked us where we were. Could we find him? He was lost. And I said to the captain, I told the captain where the first buoy was, and he didn't believe me. Well, we ran up and down the coast for a while, and finally we found the buoy and went on in. And then we were assigned to the Pacific, so as to go back to the Pacific. Now, this was one of the most enjoyable experiences that I had in my whole Navy career. We left from Norfolk, made a transit through the canal, and went all the way from Norfolk to Manus and the Admiralties, all by ourselves. We stopped at the Galapagos for fueling. We stopped at Hollandia. We stopped at Bora Bora, and finally ended up in, and of course, you know, we crossed the international date line, crossed the equator, had our little party, dunking everybody and hitting the captain a few things. They get me too, because I had never been across, and landed in Manus. There we got our orders to the Philippines. And then we became part of Kincaid's 7th Fleet, MacArthur's Navy, we called it. And we operated out of Leyte and made many trips back and forth to Ulithi, to Eniwetok, to Palau. We had a very interesting experience in Palau. Palau had been taken over. We thought it was a safe place. So we had the movies on the deck instead of down in the hold. And incidentally, I didn't see movies for 3 years after I got out of the Navy, 4 years, because that's all we saw, second-class movies. That's the only entertainment. And as we were watching the movies, 3 Japanese tried to climb aboard the ship that had been cut off. Now, this happened a lot. In all of these islands, we were island hopping, you know, back and forth. And all of these islands, when we left and said it was secure, there was always a few Japanese in the bushes. You don't know how they did it, but they were there. And they would wreak havoc with you if you didn't watch out. Finally, we were, as I say, we were operating out of Leyte mostly. Leyte is a huge, huge anchorage, a beautiful anchorage. And Leyte's on one side and Samar, the island of Samar is on the other. It could take the whole fleet in there, but the trouble is the tide did not move very rapidly. So we polluted the whole place and had to have the guys go out to sea to dump their garbage. It's surprising. It is really surprising. You ecologists, believe me, you can mess up the ocean very rapidly by throwing garbage in it. Then we made our first trip to Manila. I always wanted to get into Manila, and we did. And when we got in there, you could see all the ships that were battered. We passed the island of Bataan and pulled in. And I went ashore in Manila, and I could see what the Japanese had done in Santa Tomas. They just dug ditches, lined up the Filipinos, shot them, and they fell right down into the ditches. So they were every bit as bad as the Germans in the concentration camps. They just didn't kill quite as many Filipinos as the Germans killed. But disease was all over, was all through the island. The Japanese just absolutely ripped that beautiful city apart. It was a mess with sunken ships all over the place and everything else. When they left, now the engineering officer that I had on the tug, I met. He was now a salvage officer. I met him in the Philippines. It was surprising how you'd run across a friend, a buddy, somebody that you knew, the oddest places when you went ashore. And he was salvaging some of the Japanese ships. And he told me that what they did was layer the soldiers head and foot, down below decks. We sunk the ships, and there were all these dead Japanese sitting in it. Rather gory thing, but he had to go down there and see all that kind of stuff. We made one trip to Okinawa, and it was a pretty hazardous trip. The Japanese mined practically the whole way from Okinawa to the Philippines. So we had our guys stationed in the forecastle and all around the ship with guns shooting mines as they floated by. Luckily, we weren't hit. We got into Okinawa just the day after the Pennsylvania, the battleship Pennsylvania, who is now refurbished, had been hit by kamikaze. And it was still burning, and there were still a lot of people pretty well hurt. Then we were ordered to go back to Okinawa in about a couple of days later to convoy something up there. And our sister ship had a captain who had a son who was in the army in Okinawa, and he wanted very much to go up there and see him. So, you know, as we could do, we just swapped duty. He could take the job. It was all right just as long as somebody went up. Unfortunately, that DE was torpedoed by a submarine, the same one that hit the Indianapolis. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with what happened to the Indianapolis, but it's been written up, you know, where all those people were marooned. Nobody picked them up or anything else. The same submarine hit them and blew the bow of the DE right off. We carried a complement of about 12 to 14 officers in case, if there were some in training, and the whole crew was about 225 people. All but one officer was killed and about 129 men, so it was a pretty nasty thing. So back and forth we went, One of the good trips that we made was to Ulithi. And you know, I understand now why, was it Magellan went all the way across to the Philippines and never saw anything? The Pacific is a huge, huge island, ocean, full of just little specks, little things that you can't see. We did not have radar for a long time, but after a while, one of the alts that we had, Navy alts, they installed radar, and you could actually pick up the island visually before you could on radar, some of these places. Well, now, Ulithi and some of the other islands were huge anchoring places, very, very low, very low. I can see how this thing happened in Indonesia because the beaches and everything almost touch the ocean. And when you got a good groundswell, it covered pretty well. One of the things that we faced in the Pacific was typhoons. As I said, I would sooner be in a typhoon than a hurricane, simply because typhoons don't cover the ocean as much as a hurricane does. They're rather centralized. They come around and hit you the second time, maybe, but they don't. Now, again, in Navy history, there were a bunch, and it wasn't too well publicized, but a bunch of ships got lost in one of the typhoons out there, simply because the captains demanded that they keep course and speed. You can't do that in a typhoon. You have to find out how your ship rides the best way. We were in the same typhoon, not exactly near them, but not too far away, and all we could do was go ahead on one engine and back on the other. And I was scared this time because we conned from topside, open bridge, and you'd look down there and I swear it looked like the hole went to China, and the ship came back up and you were splashed full with water. Let's see, about 200, yes, we varied about 200 degrees. Very, very, very dangerous. We did not turn turtle, but a lot of ships did, and they were threatening. But still, within a day, we were out of the typhoon. No more. Well, my last assignment was convoying to Tokyo 5 days after the peace was signed. And that was kind of a thrill for me because I'd seen Pearl Harbor, I'd been through Pearl Harbor, and now I was going to go up and see what happened in Tokyo. I didn't get to see the celebration of the signing of the treaty, but I did get on board the Missouri. Captain and I had to go over there to report, to get our orders back for the assignment that we were going to have. And we got up topside and got mixed up in the Halsey's cabin. And there was that big Texas saddle that he had sitting right in the middle of his wardroom. And he comes over and he says, "Hey, fellas, are you lost?" I'll never forget that. And we got our orders. The orders were carry the first hospital ship, or really prisoners of war that were wounded and interned to Guam. It was a great big, beautiful, beautiful new ship full of evacuees, fellas that were really badly damaged and hurt, that had been interned in Japan. And so we took them to Guam, but it was one of the closest shaves we had. They had completely mined Tokyo Bay, except there was a channel that you could get through. And our communications officer never broke the code, telling us what the swept channel was, so we went right barreling down through the minefield. Pretty soon this ship kept yelling to us, "Hey, you're in a minefield, hey, you're in a minefield." So we turned turtle and ran pretty fast. Mines were a very tough thing, things that we were afraid of. So we took this ship back there, and then we got back into Leyte Gulf. And swung on our hook for a while, and the crew got kind of restless. So the captain and I volunteered for any kind of job that we could get. And this was now after the war. We had a very, very interesting trip. I think it was interesting anyhow. We took an Army lieutenant and a Marine Corps lieutenant, both lawyers, to the island of Bataan, not Bataan, Bataan. These were windswept islands north of Luzon, way up in the China Sea. And they were on the MacArthur's investigation committee to see about the war crimes that the Japanese had committed. And what happened was several of the Navy flyers that were landed there were hanged. And we had to excavate the graves to prove that they were. And we talked to the people on the island. Now, about 10,000 troops were stationed there on this little island, living off the island. I read in one of the stories about the atrocities that this general that was there was mentioned. He was a very cruel guy. And we took some food ashore to eat, you know. And those little Filipinos that had nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared a chicken dinner for us. They killed their chickens because we were Americans. They were so glad to see us. Well, we left our ham and our oranges for them. And some of the women just broke down and cried. They hadn't seen an orange since 1940. And it was very grim. Well, now the war is over. Now the war is over. And all of us were anxious to get home. And the point system came out. I had all sea duty, and I was one of the few married officers on the ship. So I had enough points to come home. And what they did was transfer me to a replacement depot. 25 to 30,000 soldiers, sailors, and Marines were standing out there in tents. So I had a nice bunk on my ship, and there I am sleeping in a tent, eating K rations after the war. and waiting to go home. I got a little experience of that. And luckily, I had a good friend who had a Jeep available in headquarters. So he lent me his Jeep, so I'd sneak into Manila and move around. And one of my trips, and I want to bring this out, the way you met people. In one of my picks, I picked up a little Dutch boy that was thumbing his way. And he started to tell me that he was from Sumatra, and he was on his way to Australia to be trained for a flyer back at the beginning of the war. And he was torpedoed, interned, and was in Nagasaki when the atomic bomb hit. And he told me all about what happened there, how he could have walked right outside of the prison camp and gone anywhere he wanted. But he said we didn't know where to go. So, so finally, a Liberty ship that had ammunition on it said that it would take some officers along and some enlisted men. 8 officers, and I would get 10 enlisted men, or something like that. And I was one of the officers picked to get on this thing. Now, since it had ammunition, it wasn't wanted anywhere. It had been all over the world. It had been to France, it had been to Australia, it had been to Africa. Nobody wanted their ammunition. The war was over. He tried to buy some fruit from a United Fruit Company ship that they were throwing it overboard. It really wasn't spoiled, but it was a certain limit. And they wouldn't let him buy any of this. So we left from Manila. 10 days after we left Manila, we could still see the Philippines. It took us 53 days to come from Manila to New Orleans. And we went through a hurricane when we went through the canal. We ran out of meat, we ran out of butter, we ran out of everything. We broke down 5 times. So I know how Noah felt. And on the way from, he was going to let us all off in Panama so we could buy some Christmas gifts. When we got there, he wouldn't let anybody off the ship. I guess he thought we had a little jump ship, and we were all about ready to. And we ended up in New Orleans, and it took me 3 days to get from New Orleans to Philadelphia. And of course, by that time, I could taste it. And I was released in April of 1946. From September of 1940 to April of 1946. Long time. Now, I'm available for any questions that you might ask.
Make one or two announcements. Why don't you just get a Coke or something and we'll...
Here, let me give you something. I'm dry. I'm thirsty.
Call on Mike Cavanaugh. Mike? Mike's going to tell us about the World War II seminar. It's going to be held at Williamson's
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much.
on 19 March. Mike Cavanaugh.
Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having our 2nd annual World War II seminars, 1945, 60 years after. We'll be at Williamson's, right up here on 611. We're going to have 4 veterans panels with a total of 9 veterans. And they're going to be, of course, relating. Bill Moses is going to be one of ours, and Sheila Martin and Tony Z, and also people you probably are familiar with. The keynote speaker will be Paul Stillwater, who is with the Naval Institute in Annapolis, and he's going to talk about the surrender ceremonies on the Missouri. He wrote a book about it. So there's plenty of flyers in the back. I'd like you all to take some. If you have friends you think might be interested, give them a flyer. So we hope to have a great turnout. Proceeds will go to the Institute here in Abington and then Doylestown. So any questions you have about that after, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I want to also tell you that Tom Mert, our speaker for February, would appreciate very, very much your bringing with you some items that are badly needed in Iraq, both by the soldiers and the Iraqi people. I'm just going to, you can pick one of these forms up at the desk. It's the program for today, but I'm just going to give you some highlights. Chapstick, dental floss, deodorant, nail clippers, mouthwash, headphones for CD players, paperback books, shampoo, shaving cream, and so forth. So bring those to the meeting if you can, and he'll arrange to have them packaged and shipped to the appropriate place in Iraq.
Also, you can ship them directly. The address on there should be so that you can ship them directly if you want.
Oh. All right. Questions for Bill Moses? Bob?
Mr. Moses, you said during that typhoon your ship rolled 200 degrees?
Yep, yep,
If
absolutely.
That ship rolled 200 degrees, it was belly up.
It almost did. It almost did.
At 90 degrees, it's
100
it's
degrees
already,
either side.
at 180,
Well,
at 180 it turned over.
that's what they all did. I don't know how it did, but I'm telling you, we were underwater practically, but we kept
I
up.
could realize that. I've read articles about Halsey's typhoons.
Yeah, you read that, and all those ships went over.
3 destroyers that capsized.
Abs-
They weren't the DEs, they were the destroyers.
They were absolute destroyers. But you know, those Ds were very, very seaworthy little craft.
Well,
rough as heck.
The problem was that they didn't. They wanted to refuel, and they didn't realize that they were going into these typhoons.
Spoons.
They were light. They couldn't even take seawater on board.
It was too rough.
As
Too rough.
ballast.
That's right.
And that's why they were rolling so much.
That's right.
Even a lot of the big ships were rolling. I know some.
Well, they lost a couple big ships.
The baby flat tops, the CBEs.
Yep, they lost a couple. Well,
Next question.
probably the chronometer was wrong, but it said shoot 200. I went down and saw it.
It's still bellied up.
That's plus or minus 100.
180 degrees.
Turnover. That's right. That's true. But I'll tell you, that's what the thing said. Of course, it was shaking.
100 each way.
It's the only way we could be here today. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
It was.
Any other questions? Over here. Yes, sir. Here you go.
Who supplied the fuel to keep you guys going? There must have been a tremendous fleet of tankers out there I've never heard anybody talk about.
Why, we fueled, there was always a couple tankers in the convoy, okay? Is that what you're talking? Yeah, there's always a couple tankers, and we fueled at sea. We fueled it. In fact, we had a little accident one time because it got very rough. And you know, you're awful close. That's a very dangerous operation, fueling at sea. If it's smooth, it's easy. But if it's rough, because you got very close. Yeah, we almost killed a guy. You know, we had to break off. Yeah, there were tankers in the convoy. Except when we went to the Pacific, we stopped at the various places. I said at Galapagos, at Bora Bora, and in Hollandia.
Yes, sir.
Being I was stationed at Westlock.
Oh,
You know where Westlock was?
yeah,
The Marine garrison there.
yes.
They were
Yeah.
all supposed to be guys that were shipped out from.
Yes, yes, I sure do.
They were the black
You were
sheep.
there.
I was there.
Uh-huh.
I may have been on your outfit because we went aboard at night to see your movies.
Yeah?
Also, on all the cans that were down there, I could almost picture every one of them, either torpedo tubes or guns, whatever. But we went to get the ice cream too.
Yeah.
You remember the ship called the Nitro and the Pyro?
Yes?
We were on board them.
Oh.
I was lucky they had chocolate ice cream.
I'd like to just add one little incident there in Hollandia. There was a freshwater lake, and that was something to swim in fresh water. And I'm up there, and one of the kids I went to school with was an Army captain, and loudmouth. And I heard him right away. I knew it was Johnny Laguris. And he had been out he had a battalion of stevedores. And I took him aboard the ship and let him sleep in my bunk. He said it's the first sheets he'd had in for 4 years. Yeah.
Just to review a little history, in 1938, Lindbergh went to Germany at their invitation, and that's when Gordon showed him the Army and the Air Corps. And he came in front of U.S. Congress and told them how powerful they were, and then he added, there's 6,000 miles between us, we should be isolationists, which is the wrong thing he did, and that's why Roosevelt never talked to him again, and that's why to this day, Lindbergh is buried in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And he wanted to enter the Air Force, he wouldn't let it do it, because he held us back for 2 years. Roosevelt knew that once he conquered England, he's going to come over here within a year
That's
or two.
right.
And it's a shame because he got it started sooner. So that was it.
Yeah.
Now, you're an old Navy veteran. I'd like to ask you one question, which I've been asking for years. I was in the Navy, was off Okinawa. I was one of the first ones in Japan, Yokosuka Navy Yard. We had the 1st Marine Division. I was then on LST 569. Okay, now, after that, they transferred me to Japanese cruiser Sagawa. Next to us was a Japanese battleship, Nagato. Nagato, and here's my question, had 20-inch guns. Where the hell in the world could you hide a ship with 20-inch guns from the Versailles Treaty of 1929, where 18 was the limit? That's my question.
I don't know.
I saw the guns. I was right there next to them.
Yeah, I know they did. I know they had 20-inch guns.
Okay.
The biggest we had was 14.
Well, you had 16.
We got 16 on the new
Oh.
those that sunk in Pearl Harbor. They only had 14.
Now the Sagawa cruiser had 4 engines and 4 screws. That thing top speed was over 40 knots. I know it. I was on it. And we're only a skeleton crew of 12 because we took the ship, by the way, to an week talk. They had blown up.
Yeah.
And that's where they told me to stay and witness a big, gigantic event of the atomic bomb. And they're going to give us a pair of sunglasses and watch it happen. And I answered, my question was, what kind of force are we looking at? And the guy said, something like 600 feet per minute force. Thank you, I'm going home. 2 days, they held us back, me and one other guy. To this day, I say to myself, I wonder if those guys are still living today. A pair of sunglasses?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you for that very interesting question. Anyone else back here?
Oh, well. Well, there seems to be a law. Why don't
I'm
you
all
write
right.
this?
I was a pharmacist mate in the Navy during the war.
Use the mic so we can hear it.
I just recently found out about, can you hear that? An organization for National Association for Medics and Pharmacist Mates. And I don't know a whole lot about it, I just found out about them. But I understand that they're planning a convention in San Antonio next year. So there aren't too many members yet. I brought flyers there that I copied. It doesn't have a whole lot of information, just where to send your check if you want to join, that kind of thing. So if you're interested and you're a pharmacist, mate, or a medic, you know, consider it.
I'd like to add one thing, if I could, please. I feel very fortunate it happened. I lived in a small street in Bethlehem, and there were 4 of us, all graduated at the same time, all the same age, all grew up. I guess I went into the service at least a year and a half before the others, because I volunteered to go in right away. I wanted to get the Navy. And they didn't believe that the draft was going to come about. And I'm the only one that came home. And I had 3 brother-in-laws that were in the service. One was at the Battle of the Bulge, got wounded there. Another was a CB, another was a soldier in Hawaii. And my wife has a first cousin who got out of Dunkirk. She's British. So that war affected our family quite a lot, and our friends.
Bill, you mentioned the USS Indianapolis.
Yes.
One of our speakers many years ago was Don Mack, who was on the Indianapolis.
Oh boy.
And he was in the water.
Yeah, I bet he was.
Yeah.
That was horrible. Yeah.
Looks like we have a short program today. Anybody have a story they want to tell us right now?
Otherwise, you get to go home early. Okay, see you next time.
I'm sorry it was short.
Games between Allentown.
Oh, I sure do. Yeah, that's
Well, I'm
right.
Allentonian.
Well, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Remember when Bethlehem finally almost won the scholarship thing? Yeah. Johnny.
Going out, putting timber, $30 covers
It was a short program today, huh?
Yeah.
Also, he has a few pictures up here if anybody wants to see what he's got.
Spit into the mic.
See you, bud. Got your winter hat on anyhow. No wonder you don't want mine cold. I'll tell Betty we saw you down here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.